Joining us now live from the Ukrainian port city of Odessa is global affairs analyst Michael Bociurkiw. Michael is the former spokesperson of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, among many other titles and jobs which you have had over the years. Michael, thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you again.
Okay, so here's how Russia is describing these talks with White House officials. The two leaders agreed on the need to leave behind an absolutely abnormal period in the relations between two great powers, when they essentially did not communicate except on certain technical and humanitarian issues. The Foreign Ministry, Minister Sergei Lavrov has also said that because this is essentially talks between the US and Russia, there really is no role or no place at the table for Europe. And while there will actually be a discussion on a kind of a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, the actual terms of a peace deal are not on the table. The Americans and the Russians are negotiating, at least in part, the parameters around an agreement, what it will look like to end the war in Ukraine. And not being in the room for the Ukrainians, that's a bit like a spouse not being invited to couples therapy before a divorce. So what are the serious consequences here for Ukraine being excluded from this round of talks?
Well, you put it very well. Some other people here in Ukraine would have described how they're being treated by the Trump administration as akin to being treated by a slum landlord. And some might say Mr. Trump has a bit of experience in that area. But yeah, they feel they've been totally sidelined. And, you know, it's not quite clear what the Trump administration is going to negotiate away on Ukraine's behalf. I can also tell you what's becoming a little bit more public are the terms that the Trump administration, extortionate terms the Trump administration put forward to the Ukrainian side for rare earth resources here in Ukraine. It's really unbelievable, amounting to potentially $500 billion and in perpetuity. One quote from here is saying that basically the Trump administration is telling Ukraine, pay us first, then feed your children later. So if we use that prism to look at what's happening, it ain't looking good. And one other big thing here, of course, is what's going to happen to that big land bridge that the Russians have connecting the mainland of Russia to Crimea. Will that ever come back to Ukraine? Probably not.
Well, everything surrounding the snub for Ukraine it now comes down to this response on Monday from the Ukrainian president, which seemed both understandable and reasonable. Here's Volodymyr Zelensky responding to not being included in these talks about to get underway in the Saudi capital. Here he is.
Ukraine will not participate. Ukraine knew nothing about them. Ukraine perceives any negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine as those with no results. We cannot recognize anything or any agreements about us without us.
Yeah, well, most may agree with Zelensky, or at least be sympathetic or supportive of his outright rejection to whatever is the outcome of the Saudi meeting. But what are his choices? What can he realistically refuse to accept? You know, whatever the Americans and Russians may decide later or later today, is he in a position to say no?
Unfortunately, no. And I think that clip you heard there was mostly for a domestic audience. But at the end of the day, Mr. Zelensky has very little leverage. And I'll tell you why, is because the couple of things the Americans have right now is they're sharing really, really crucial intel information on a daily basis with the Ukrainians, including targeting data for Ukrainians to strike inside of Russia. The second thing they have, and that's of concern to me, my neighbors, and everyone else in Ukraine, is that if the U.S., the Trump administration wants to play tough, they could all of a sudden, like this, disable the Patriot defense missile system. We are getting drones and Russian missiles every day, especially the drones. And without that defense shield, Ukraine is going to be made very vulnerable. There'll be more death and destruction. So that's why I'm saying, and I'm putting out that warning to everyone, including European leaders, is that the United States under Trump could play very tough and could turn very ugly.
NATO members also are locked out of these discussions. That raises concerns about their relevance, giving President Trump's constant criticism of the alliance, as well as questions about US commitment to NATO. And on that, here's the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Here's what he said.
On defence, it's clear the US is not going to leave NATO. But we Europeans will have to do more. The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing.
Bloomberg reports that over the weekend, the new chair of NATO's military committee, this is the Italian Admiral Cavo Dragoni, he said the US will not pull out of NATO. Okay, so he agrees with that. But he did add a withdrawal of some of the 100,000 US troops stationed in Europe could be on the agenda. He warned Europe to expect that because of some commitments that the United States has far away from here in the Pacific. The point here seems to be that the US doesn't have to withdraw from NATO to effectively end the effectiveness of the defense alliance. Right now, they can do that by downgrading logistics and leadership.
Yeah.
And if that happens, and do you think that's likely to happen? And are the Europeans capable of filling that void at this moment in time, right now?
Well, yes and no. Yes, the Americans are capable of doing that. And no, the Europeans cannot fill it. To give you an example, I mean, the British Prime Minister is talking tough and commitment to Ukraine. But the reality of it is, like in many countries here in Europe, is they just don't have the capacity, the resources to all of a sudden start spending tens of billions of pounds or euros on defense. If what Mr. Starmer is talking about comes into reality, it will take about 30,000 British soldiers to have 10,000 soldiers in Ukraine on an enduring basis. The other thing the Europeans forgot to do in their talks about what to do next under Mr. Macron is to invite frontline states. Even, for example, the Ukrainian Prime Minister wasn't invited. So how can they possibly talk about a security infrastructure affecting this part of the world if key people aren't at the table? But once again, I'll go back to what I said at the start, is that the resources just aren't there. European leaders and the UK have been sleepwalking their way through this crisis, relying on US largesse. They were told a long time ago in Trump 1.0, get ready to carry the burden of European security on your own shoulders, and they didn't, and that's where we are today.
Which sort of gets us back to Donald Trump 2.0 in the second term, Trump 47, if you like, who seems much less focused on the level of defense spending as a percentage of GDP of NATO members, and a much more sort of focus, or a bigger focus, if you like, on dividing up the world according to influences of power. This seems to be a deal which Trump wants to make with Putin, which affects Ukraine greatly. And Europe and NATO don't seem to be a calculation here. They don't seem to be a factor in any of the negotiations. And yet this is something which I think was pretty much telegraphed before Donald Trump won the election in November.
Yeah, well, a couple of things there is, number one, Mr. Trump is obsessed with having a foreign affairs win. He hasn't had one in North Korea, Afghanistan. Things are not going well in the Middle East. He's really upset key allies like Jordan and Egypt. Secondly, and I hope I get this right, if I can just quote one of the ultra supportive Kremlin newspapers, is basically they portrayed an imaginary phone call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, according to one of our reporter colleagues. And basically, Mr. Trump says to Mr. Putin, I have a cold country, you have a cold country, let's divide up the world. And Mr. Putin, according to this newspaper report, says, well, that's what I've been telling you all along. Let's do it. So I really do think it goes back to what I said a couple of weeks ago. We appear to be on the verge of a kind of hemispheric division of the world where Mr. Trump is going to concentrate on the Western Hemisphere. He's going to let Mr. Putin do pretty much whatever he wants in this part of the world. Xi Jinping will have the Indo-Pacific. It's a scary scenario for all of us, I think.
Yeah, and then to this post-world order which was established in the wake of World War II by the United States, which has kept the world from a global conflict for 80, 90 years. Michael, times are changing, and I guess we'll find out how and what the implications will be in no time at all, I guess. Michael, thanks for being with us. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.